I have a bit of a dilemma, and I know you're going to say, Matt, this is the nicest problem in the world to have, but I'm one of the few people privileged enough to own both the FX Impact and the FX Crown. Two beautiful guns, and my problem is that I've got to choose which one to use when I go out to hunt or to make a tutorial video, and that's a difficult choice. And most of you will know, if you've seen enough of my videos, that this has kind of been my go-to gun, the FX Impact, for a really long time. But why would I choose the Impact over the Crown? You know, what makes this gun better for my purposes than the Crown? Because it's not necessarily a better gun. The features are very, very similar. They've both got the adjustability, they've both got the accuracy, they've both got the shot count, so why would I choose the Impact over the Crown? That's what we're going to discuss today. We're going to look at the topic of bullpups versus rifles, and this is kind of like a general bullpups versus rifles video, but because these are two very popular guns all over the world at the moment, we are going to discuss these particular guns and look at, you know, what gun would be best for what situation. So that's what's coming up in this video. Let's get to it. And I think the first thing we need to do is to actually define rifle and define bullpup, because many people kind of don't understand the meaning of both of these things. Most people think a bullpup is a gun with a very short barrel, and that's just not the case. In fact, that's completely wrong, and in many cases the bullpup actually has a longer barrel than the rifle. The definition of a bullpup is a gun which has its trigger group far in front of its action and magazine. So if you look at the Impact here, you'll see the trigger kind of halfway up the gun, but the magazine is slotted in right over here. The barrel starts right at the back. This is where the action is, and so this would be the bullpup. Whereas the Crown, if we take a close look at the Crown, you will see that the trigger is right here by the action, or both of them are forward over here. So this would be the rifle, and that's how you kind of define them. But these guns both have the same, actually exactly the same length barrel. These are both 500mm barrels. So it's got nothing to do with barrel length, it's got to do with the positioning of the action and the trigger. So that's how you define bullpup and rifle. And this is kind of different to most bullpups because the Impact actually has its heart, its the valve and hammer and all of that stuff right here in the middle, so right by the trigger. So I don't know what you'd call the action of an air gun. I would define it as, you know, where all the important mechanics are, the valve and the hammer and all of that stuff. So the Impact is very different, and we'll get to that a little bit later. That's one of the reasons why I would use the Impact as opposed to any other bullpup. But if you want to look at a true bullpup air gun, you would probably look at something like the Wildcat. This would be more of a traditional bullpup because we've got the action and the breech block, as you'd call it on the air gun, right at the back here. That's what most bullpups have, and then the trigger is connected by a rod mechanism further forward. So this would be a more traditional looking bullpup, and we'll get to this gun a little bit later as well. Oh, and by the way, the reason we're not comparing the Wildcat to the Crown is because they're really not in the same price range. The Impact and the Crown would be the one that most people would look at if they were looking to get a gun in that same price range, and that's why I'm doing those two. If you want to compare something to the Wildcat, it would be the Streamline, but that would be for another day's comparison. Today we are looking at these two guns because they are my favorites. They're my preciouses.
What's it saying, my precious, my love?
And I'm watching my bird very carefully because he's kind of eyeing out my Impact, and I think he wants to eat it. Obi-Wan, don't you dare. No, come here. Okay. So let's start off by talking about rifles and kind of the advantages that rifles give you in many aspects as opposed to bullpups. And you'll know if you've been watching this channel for a long time, when I started off, I only had interest in rifles. I had no interest in bullpups. I looked at a bullpup and I thought it was a compromise. I thought that a bullpup design was sacrificing very important things like a good crisp trigger, like an adjustable or at least a comfortable cheek piece, and being able to cock the gun easily. I thought that there was a lot of compromising going on, and for that reason I, for a very long time just stuck with rifles. And that's a very important thing to consider, especially you know, considering traditional bullpups to traditional rifles are much better in a lot of ways. I've always had a preference for a beautiful looking gun, you know, like a lot of the guns that come out of England. At first FX wasn't making any good looking guns as far as I was concerned, but that changed when the Royale came along, and now we have stuff like this, which just has this beautiful laminate stock, you know, beautiful shaping on the breech block, just a really good looking gun all around that isn't compromising on anything. And that's what I love about the Crown. You can't really fault it in any way. It's a beautiful, beautiful gun that performs extremely well. So my bias towards guns was largely based on the fact that I like to do a lot of prone shooting, and when you're doing prone shooting, you need a solid base from which to shoot from. So for example, with the impact, you've got the bipod, we've got the place at the back to put the sandbag, but there's not much space between them. You've got maybe this much space, and ideally that's not really what you want. You want as much of a gap here as possible between your bipod and your sandbag. That just gives you a more solid base to shoot from. When the gun recoils, there's less chance of the front of the barrel moving. So in terms of an ideal shooting platform, a bullpup doesn't really cut it. The Crown is a little bit better, but the bottle in the front does kind of take away from that. I would have liked to have mounted this bipod right in the front, and you can get like a band that goes around here on which you can attach a bipod. I just didn't really want to put weight on the bottle itself, so I've just left it like this. So this isn't really an ideal rifle as well for shooting off a bench or for shooting prone. If you really wanted to do that, you would get something like the Streamline, which is actually a really nice gun to shoot off a bench with or shoot prone, because you've got all that space. It's a really solid gun to shoot with, and I actually love this gun. It's extremely accurate. It's extremely nice to shoot off a bench with. It's actually extremely nice to shoot with in all departments. It kind of just lacks that adjustability, and that's why I've chosen the Crown and the Impact over this, but a really good gun still. So also something to consider if you don't need the adjustability. Is this thing with the bipod a deal breaker? Well, if you're going to be shooting bench rest competitions, then I wouldn't really suggest the Impact for something like that. There are many good bench rest guns out there, like the Raws, Steyr LG110s, which have won so many bench rest competitions around the world. Even the Air Arms Ultimate Sporter, which now has a regulator. Air Arms listened to me. After a few years, they've put the regulator in. That's going to make the Air Arms Ultimate Sporter a fantastic bench rest gun. But don't discount the Impact completely, because you only have to look at extreme bench rest and the record it has there to know that even though it is a bullpup, it doesn't seem to have had much of an effect on its ability to win competitions. So it's not a gun that you would buy for bench rest shooting, but it's certainly capable. By the way, these were number 1 and 2 at last year's Extreme Bench Rest. Number 1, Shane Keller won first place with the Crown. Number 2, I took second place with the Impact. So we've got number 1 and 2 here. They're both going to do the job. Now here's a big one. A big advantage that rifles have over bullpups is that, generally speaking, they are a little bit less complicated than bullpups. And this means a number of things. Number 1, it means that a gun like the Crown is significantly easier to manufacture than the Impact. And it also comes out a little bit cheaper, which is amazing, because I mean, if you include the beautiful laminate stock and all of that stuff, you'd think it would be way more expensive. It isn't. This gun, I've been at the FX factory, I've seen both of these being manufactured. This one is the one that's much easier to produce. That brings down the cost significantly, but it also makes it much more reliable. There's less moving parts in this gun, which means there's less that can go wrong. And the Royale block is actually what this block is based off. And the FX Royale has been around for so long, they've pretty much perfected all the tolerances and all of that stuff. So from day one, when this gun started to be manufactured, it was pretty much perfect. There were no leaks, there were no flaws. From day one, it was tried and tested, it was a reliable gun. Whereas the Impact, this gun was designed from scratch. So there were a lot of things that needed to be ironed out when this first started being manufactured. I think they've got it right now, but in the start there were, the tolerances, manufacturing tolerances had to be refined over a few years, and it's a little bit more labor intensive with the manufacture and assembly process, which means you are going to pay more. So if reliability is the most important thing to you, or if you're going to be out hunting for long periods of time and you don't want something to go wrong, you might want to consider that. the Crown may be a little bit more reliable in the impact. That being said though, one of the cool things about FX is that they do actually include the cost of repairs and spare parts in the overall cost of the gun. So if you buy an impact and something goes wrong with it, and let's say you're in the US, you can send FX an email, they'll send you replacement O-rings, or you can send it into the genius that is Ernest Rowe at FX USA, and he'll fix the gun for you. So that's one of the great things I like about FX. They are complicated guns, so there is a greater chance of something going wrong, but they're willing to help you out if that does happen. Okay, let's talk about triggers, because let's face it, bullpups have a terrible reputation when it comes to triggers. I've shot with guns like the airgun Matador, the caliber gun Cricket, the Huben K1, all guns that are worth reviewing and worth using, but I found the triggers to be quite mushy, and that's because of that trigger linkage that goes back between the trigger and the breech block. It really takes away that crisp feeling, that crisp trigger. The impact doesn't have this problem because, as I mentioned earlier, the hammer and valve are right here above the trigger, so there is no linkage going back. So that doesn't apply to this. So this trigger is just as good as the Crown. Both of them are really, really good. You don't lose anything in that department when you buy the impact, but for most other PCP air guns, it is an issue. Another gun that this isn't an issue with is the Daystate Pulsar and the Daystate Renegade, because they both have electronic triggers, so there is no linkage there. Well done for Daystate for not compromising either in that department. But yeah, if you're going to buy anything other than the Daystate bullpups or the FX impact, it is definitely something you'll want to consider. So we've mentioned all these great things about rifles, and technically speaking, there's a lot of advantages that rifles have that bullpups just don't have. So why on earth would I choose to use a gun like the Impact in so many of my videos? You know, what's so great about this gun that would make me want to put everything away, lock them up in the cupboard to gather dust, and only use this thing? That's something that I struggle to answer as well, because to be honest, when I first saw the Impact announced at, I think it was IWA 2015 or 2014, I took one look at it and thought, well, that is an ugly gun. It didn't look good to me, in my opinion. I thought it looked naked. I thought it was a sin to have a gun with no fore end, to have to hold a bipod or to have to hold an air cylinder when you're taking a shot. I thought it was terrible, to be honest. But then I went to SHOT Show in 2016, I picked up the Impact for myself, and I realized that my concerns were actually not even important. I thought it felt good in my hands, I thought it handled well, and I thought the technology that was in this gun was just so far ahead of any other bullpup out there, and there were no compromises with this gun like you have with other bullpups. You've got this cocking mechanism forward over here, so there's no doing this awkward cocking like you've got with a caliber gun Cricket and all that stuff. You've got it forward, nice and easy to use. You've got a massive magazine at the back, which is something you can't have with a normal rifle, because you'd have to lift your scope so high to make space for the magazine. So that was a huge benefit. And obviously the adjustability that we just had never seen on any gun before at the time when this was announced. And you know, for those reasons alone, about a month or two after SHOT Show 2016, I actually got this gun, and there's been no looking back ever since. It's been absolutely amazing. But that's the Impact, and we're talking about bullpups in general. Why would you choose a bullpup over an airgun? A lot of people say, you know, the form factor, it's nice and short, it's nice and compact. That's obviously a big one, but is that form factor alone enough to kind of make you overlook all the other benefits that a rifle gives you? That's something that you'll have to decide, but let's talk about why a bullpup might be a good idea, form factor aside. Well, for one thing, I've mentioned earlier, a lot of people think that bullpups have shorter barrels than rifles. Well, they don't. This barrel, as I mentioned, is exactly the same as that one. They're both 500mm barrels, but the great thing about a bullpup is that if I wanted to put a longer barrel on this gun, let's say 600mm or 700mm, it would still be completely usable. It would still be quite short and compact, even with a 700mm barrel. And you'll see in my upcoming Patagonia hunting videos, which were a fantastic success, by the way, that I actually put a 700mm barrel on Claudio's Impact, which I borrowed there in Patagonia, and it was still completely perfect for hunting out there in that thick vegetation. That's something you just would not be able to do with a gun like the Crown. I believe that 500mm on the Crown is perfect. This is actually a 177 barrel on here. Perfect length. fantastic for general purpose use, but there's no ways I'll be putting a 700mm barrel on the Crown. So one thing, why would you want a long barrel? For one, longer barrel will give you more power. A lot of people think it gives you more accuracy. Not necessarily. A longer barrel does not make your groups smaller in itself. What it does do though is it allows you to use less air for a given velocity. So let's say I want to get 900 feet per second. I could use a shorter barrel, but then I'd have to use more power because it would have to accelerate over a shorter length of barrel, and more power equals more vibration, and that can throw your groups off. Whereas if I put a longer barrel, let's say I want to put a 600mm 177 barrel or 22 barrel on the impact, I could turn the power down, get the same velocity, and have less barrel harmonics, which would equate to better groups. So that's something to consider. That's something you can't do in the Crown. And for my general purposes, I'm kind of heading the route of wanting to shoot projectiles with a high ballistic coefficient. Because we're limited in the calibers we can use in South Africa, we kind of have to be smart about what we select, and the impact is the gun that I want to use moving forward because it allows me to put those longer barrels on without compromising in the overall feel of the gun. And that's my reasons for using the impact. Another thing that maybe has prevented me from using the Crown more is that it's such a beautiful gun, but it's a gun that you don't want to take into rough environments that could cause this beautiful laminate stock to get scratched up or damaged. It's not by any means a delicate gun. It's not a gun that you have to keep in bubble wrap the whole time, but it does have a beautiful stock that can get scratched a little bit, and it does have a free floating barrel, which is good for accuracy, but if you bump it a bit too hard or you don't put it in a nice hard case when you're transporting it and that barrel gets a little bit bent, you lose your zero, and you don't want to have to worry about that when you're taking a shot at an animal. You want to put in a clean shot, you want to put in an ethical shot, you want to know that that pellet's going to go where you want it to go. And that's something that I've had to think about a bit. Despite the impact having the same length barrel, the barrel, most of it is housed, it kind of goes through the middle of this gun, which protects it a little bit. If you give this gun a big bump on the side, barrel doesn't move a bit. That's something I've considered, and that's something that I like about this gun. I don't have to worry about it getting scratched, I don't have to worry about it getting bumped. It's going to hold zero, it's going to be reliable, and that's why I've been using the impact more. As for a conclusion, well, there is no conclusion. It's a very personal decision. It's going to depend very much on what you want to use the gun for. So I'm not going to say which one is better. For me personally, I'm probably going to use the impact more often. But if you want to, let's say you're in the UK and you're looking to get a 12 foot-pound gun, there's absolutely no need to get the impact. You don't need to have a very long barrel. You can do perfectly fine with a shorter barrel. The Crown's probably going to do a better job for you. You've got the Smooth Twist X barrel, which happens to be better at 12 foot-pounds anyway, from what I've seen. You can have that barrel nice and short without compromising any accuracy or any power. It's perfect. And it's going to be perhaps a little bit more reliable than the impact was at 12 foot-pounds. If you want to shoot 177 or 22 at standard powers, the Crown's going to be perfect. This 500mm barrel looks really, really good. However, if you're looking at a 25 or 30 caliber, or if you're looking to shoot even a 22 or 177 with a longer barrel for shooting slugs, for example, then something like the impact might be a better option to look at, because that 600 and 700mm barrel looks a lot better and feels a lot better on the impact than it does on the Crown. So just things to consider when choosing between these two guns and any other bullpup or rifle for that matter. You may not even like either of these, which is perfectly fine. Yeah, it's one of those general things that can apply to many other guns as well. And that's all, guys. Thanks for watching. I do have some really cool videos coming up. I've got those last two Oxwagon Diaries videos, which are still coming. I've got the whole Patagonia series, in which I went to Patagonia and we hunted beavers and rabbits, which are both invasive species there, for the Department of Environmental Affairs, which was fantastic. Got rid of some problem animals. The park rangers were extremely happy with what we were doing, so that's great. And then I've got IWA in Germany coming up. I'm actually leaving in a few days for IWA. I may even have left already by the time you see this. And I'll be showing you what's new in the world of air guns and in the world of shooting in general. I'll be taking you with me to Germany, so hopefully you'll enjoy that as well. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.